This is the Ethanol Report, the industry podcast from the Renewable Fuels Association since 2008. I'm Cindy Zimmerman. As we celebrate 250 years of our nation's independence this month, the Renewable Fuels Association just released a new poll that found the majority of Americans appreciate how the Renewable Fuel Standard and ethanol have helped increase our energy independence. I'm speaking with RFA President and CEO Geoff Cooper and Communications Director Ken Colombini. And Ken, why don't you get us started by telling us about some of these latest polling numbers?
Sure. We have been working with Morning Consult, a polling and consultation firm for over a decade now, on polling voter attitudes about ethanol and its issues. We do it about every quarter or so. The newest one was conducted between June 23rd and June 25th. They surveyed about 2,000 registered voters online. The margin of error is about 2%, so it's not too bad. It's a pretty standard poll margin of error. We saw some really great numbers this time around. Support for the Renewable Fuel Standard by registered voters reached an all-time high of 74%. By comparison, going back to 10 years ago, it was polling in the 50s. So that's a really sizable increase over time. Interesting this time around as well is that support for the RFS by Republicans is now up 6 percentage points over March. So that was good to see as well. Tied to this, and I'll just leave this one extra point here for you, the percentage of those who believe that oil companies should be required to meet their renewable volume obligations has risen 5 points since March to 58%. Only 19% of those who were polled would let them off the hook. So those are great figures for the RFS as we celebrate our country's 250th anniversary.
And Geoff, what was your reaction when you saw these poll numbers?
Well, again, I obviously very good results for our industry, very good results for the Renewable Fuel Standard. And Ken mentioned 74% of voters responding to this poll support the RFS. Just 12% are opposed to the policy, and so that means and whatever's left are folks who didn't have an opinion. So we're almost at a 7-to-1 margin among voters that do have an opinion about the RFS. They support it. And then the small refinery exemption issue Ken mentioned, the question was asked of poll respondents, should oil refining companies be let out of their obligations to blend renewable fuels? And by a margin of 3-to-1, respondents with an opinion said no, they should be required to blend their obligated volumes of renewable fuels. And I think that's important right now because of the debate happening in Congress around potential reform of the small refinery exemption program. And we also know that EPA is preparing to announce the exemptions for the 2025 compliance year. So I think those are important results that hopefully our policymakers and the folks at EPA are paying attention to. I guess just one other thing I would note, I think what was particularly compelling in these results, I think, is that Americans are paying attention to what's happening in the news. When you look at the situation in the Middle East, when you look at what's going on in Iran, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, high gas prices, near record prices at the pump that we've seen the last few years, I think all of that has brought the concept or the idea of energy independence and energy security back into the spotlight. And we hear so much about, we're producing more crude oil in the U.S. today than we'll ever need, and we are energy independent. Well, clearly we're not. When events halfway around the world can still influence pump prices overnight the way that they have the last few months, we still have work to do. And it's clear that Americans, everyday American voters, see ethanol and renewable fuels as a way to enhance our energy security and help insulate us from those sorts of incidents. So again, I think the timing of these results is great, and again, very positive, favorable results for what we're trying to do at the Renewable Fuels Association.
And if I could jump on that and offer some extra data points from the survey, 83% of the registered voters that we polled are concerned about the price of gas and price fluctuation. 71% say it will affect their vote in the midterms. Interesting point this time around is that while the number of Democrats who say this has been high at 83% now, the number of Republicans who say it will affect their vote has risen 10 points since March. So there's a definite sea change going on when it comes to the effect of high gas prices on the midterm elections. And as Geoff pointed out, people want energy independence. 87% of those polled believe it's important that we be that. 4 out of 5 think ethanol should be an important part of that. So great to see that kind of support for ethanol when you see so much garbage out there on social media and elsewhere. These half statements and mistruths about ethanol that are out there. So there's still so much voter support for ethanol and the RFS.
Well, and Geoff, when we talk to the average American, the RFS is policy, and that might be hard for them to completely understand, but they do understand gas prices, and they are paying more attention, it seems like, to ethanol and to the fact that it's homegrown and contributes to lower gas prices. Do you think this is going to be helpful as we still look to the Senate to move year-round nationwide E15 this year?
It absolutely will be helpful, Cindy. And again, you're right. The RFS is a very complicated program when you look at how the regulation operates and obligated parties and RIN credits and you almost have to have a PhD to understand exactly how the RFS program functions. But it can be boiled down very simply when you talk about the objective of the RFS. It is very simple. It is to increase the amount of domestically produced renewable fuels that are blended into our fuel supply and to reduce dependence on foreign sources of energy. And that's exactly what the RFS has done. That's exactly what it continues to do. And I think most Americans understand that. They may not understand the details of the RFS, but they understand the objective, and they understand that that goal is being achieved with the RFS. That all is going to be helpful as we continue the push for E15. We also did ask several questions about voter attitudes about E15, and we're going to be separately sharing those results and really promoting those results as Congress comes back to town after the July 4th recess and hopefully gets serious about advancing that year-round E15 legislation in the Senate.
And Ken, what else was in the poll that you wanted to bring out?
Well, I would just leave this one extra figure is that nearly 3/4 of voters surveyed want their fuel made here in America. I think it's something that we've definitely seen over the years. People are more comfortable with that. That's an important part of energy independence. So for this round of information from the polling, I think we touched on everything. Ethanol support overall still remains high at 66%, so it's really good to see that. The one thing that I do take comfort in is you are seeing a change in Republican attitudes about ethanol and the issues where there's a lot more support being seen here. I think, as Geoff pointed out, it's important to note that gas prices are down, but they still remain higher than they were before the war began. So over several months of higher gas prices, everybody is seeing this. Everybody's wanting a change, and hopefully E15 can help bring that change to us.
Well, Geoff, over the time that you've been in the industry, over the last 20 years or so, how would you describe the way support for ethanol has increased over the last decade or so?
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen support for ethanol generally increase, not only among policymakers and the folks in Washington, D.C., writing legislation and implementing the Renewable Fuel Standard, but also among everyday Americans. And we see that reflected in these polling numbers. As Ken mentioned, we've been doing this polling for over 10 years. And you can see some very clear trends emerge when you ask about favorability of ethanol and other energy sources. You can see that favorability for ethanol continues to increase. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think it shows that there is a greater understanding today than there was 10 or 15 years ago about ethanol's economic benefits. I think the general public better understands that blending ethanol into gasoline helps reduce the price. And there's clear evidence of that every single time they pull up to the pump. They can buy E10 or they can buy E0 premium gasoline for another 60 or 80 cents or $1 per gallon. And so, I mean, it's there in your face every time you pull up to the pump. And if you're lucky enough to buy your gas at a station that offers E15 or maybe even E85, that is only exacerbated. You really see the benefits. So I think that's partially responsible. But I think the other thing that is responsible for the increased favorability of ethanol is just the growing understanding and appreciation of ethanol's environmental benefits. We have seen continued efficiency improvements in the industry, whether that's ethanol yield per bushel or lower energy use per gallon produced. And then you look at what's happening on the farm. We're obviously seeing greater productivity per acre. So I think a lot of those myths that were out there 15 years ago, 20 years ago when the RFS was first adopted, we've proven over the past 2 decades that those are just not things that people need to be concerned about. And I think, these results show that those messages are resonating. You know, Ken pointed out, and this is especially important, I think, for people in our industry. It's really easy to get down if you allow yourself to get sucked into the cesspool of social media, and some of the other garbage that's out there. You got these anonymous bots and paid accounts that are intended to do nothing but spread misinformation about ethanol. But when you step back from that and talk to everyday Americans who aren't thinking about ethanol every day, but when you ask them questions specifically about renewable fuels, what you find is they generally have a very favorable opinion.
Well, also looking at that same 10-year time period, how much has ethanol's share of the liquid fuel supply grown? Where are we at as far as that's concerned right now?
It has grown in terms of its share of the fuel supply. Yes, we in 2025, ethanol on average comprised 10.5% of the average gallon of gasoline. And so what that tells you obviously is just about every gallon of gas out there contains 10% ethanol. But then there's a little bit of fuel on the margin that contains higher levels, 15%, or flex fuels like E85. And so that blend rate, we call it, is continuing to move up. And we've seen that steadily increasing year after year after year, with a few exceptions. In the first Trump administration, when they doled out a whole bunch of these small refinery exemptions, guess what? The ethanol blend rate went down. So again, I think that speaks to the importance of the RFS. But yes, we're using more ethanol in our gasoline today, but overall gasoline consumption is actually lower than it was 10 years ago. So for us to continue growing demand domestically, that means we're going to have to continue to increase our share of the gas tank. And we are seeing that, but not nearly quick enough. And that's where approval of year-round E15 really comes into play.
Well, when
And
we talk
here,
about, go ahead, Con.
and here's an interesting fact from the survey. I'll let you know also is that we asked the voters if they'd be interested in purchasing a flex fuel vehicle in the future as their next car or an EV. 57% would be interested in buying a flex fuel vehicle if it were available. Only 43% are interested in buying an electric vehicle. In fact, 47% said no, they don't want an EV. So
Yeah,
that's 20 percentage points above a flex fuel vehicle.
and the key point there from Ken is if they're available. We
Yes.
know that
Right.
flex fuel vehicles the last several years have fallen off a cliff because automakers have stopped producing them, at least at the rates that they did 10 years ago. And that, again, is all tied to policy and regulation and some short-sighted decisions the Obama administration made years ago to phase down and phase out the credit that automakers received for building FFVs. So again, we think these results could be helpful as EPA and policymakers think about the future of fuel economy standards and tailpipe emission standards. I think what this shows is Americans want choices. And don't be forcing electric vehicles down their throats. Give them options, and let's make sure that FFVs are one of those options.
And E85 has been such a great bargain. It's always less than regular, but it's been a huge difference the last couple of months, $1, $2, especially in California, and yet they can't buy new flex fuel vehicles.
That's right, Cindy. California is the single largest market for E85 by far. There's a lot of E85 that is sold in California. It is a popular fuel choice out there, and that's because if you pull up to the pump at a station that offers E85, in recent months we've seen that product priced often $1.50 or $2 per gallon less than regular gasoline. And when regular gasoline is $6 or $7 a gallon, that's a big difference. In some cases, we've seen that spread as wide as $3 a gallon. So there is growing demand and drivers actually clamoring for FFV availability in the state of California. And unfortunately, the automakers are not really responding to that market signal, with the lone exception of General Motors, which in the last few years has recognized, people want these vehicles. And so they have restarted production of FFVs, at least for certain models. And we're hoping that other automakers pay attention to what's going on in the marketplace. And we're hoping that EPA and policymakers at the federal level are paying attention to that as well.
Well, you would think that automakers would respond to the demand, and you would also think that California would be selling E15 by now, especially after it was passed into law 9 months ago. And still we got the bureaucracy dragging their feet on that, right?
That's right. I mean, California drivers, unfortunately, for the last 9 months or more, have missed out on the savings that they could have had with E15. The governor signed year-round E15 in California into law last fall, so it's been nearly a year ago. But the bureaucratic process out there has not allowed retailers to offer that fuel yet. There's one hurdle in particular, the state fire marshal's office, that has thrown up some ridiculous red flags and raised concerns about equipment compatibility, and that's been enough to slow the whole thing way down. So we're working, trying to work through that as quickly as possible, because we are hearing, demand from California consumers that are saying, wait a minute, I thought we were going to have this lower cost fuel option available. The legislature passed it unanimously. The governor signed it into law. Where is this fuel? And people are starting to pay attention. There's actually been a couple recent news articles on that. The San Francisco Chronicle, the New York Post, just recently wrote about, hey, what's the deal? California drivers were supposed to have access to lower cost E15, and it's nowhere in the market. It's not available. So hopefully we're going to have a breakthrough in California on E15, soon, in the weeks or months ahead, so that fuel can start flowing into that market.
Well, as we reflect on our 250 years of American independence as a nation, the Renewable Fuel Standard was enacted in 2005 and then expanded in 2007. That was almost 20 years ago, under the Energy Independence and Security Act. How would you say that ethanol has helped enhance energy independence? Maybe not in the last 250 years, but at least in the last 20 years.
Well, it certainly has been enhanced, and the RFS is a big part of that. When the Energy Independence and Security Act was passed by Congress back in 2007 and signed into law by President George W. Bush, we were producing somewhere around 7 billion gallons annually of ethanol and just a tiny bit of biomass-based diesel. Today, we're on track to be producing, somewhere on the order of 26 billion gallons of renewable fuel in 2026. So in 20 years, we've more than tripled, nearly quadrupled the amount of renewable fuel that is being produced and consumed here in the U.S., and the RFS is the big reason for that. Now, at the same time, yes, you absolutely have seen growth in U.S. oil production, and the fracking boom and the emergence of that technology 15, 16 years ago has really changed the U.S. productive capacity when it comes to petroleum products. But again, all you have to do is look at the fact that when somebody sneezes in the Middle East, our pump prices jump by $1 a gallon overnight. And that tells you that even though we're producing more liquid fuels, more crude oil, more petroleum products, we are still, that market is still global in nature, and anything that upsets the apple cart, even if it's halfway around the world, is going to affect prices here at home. That market is just so globally integrated that there's not much you can do about that other than continue reducing our dependence on petroleum products and increasing our reliance on fuels that, where the supply chain is entirely contained within our borders.
And it's also so important to keep in mind on this anniversary of America that ethanol is a homegrown fuel, American made by American farmers who were really the ones who just started the whole industry.
Well, that's an interesting point because we do our research every year for our economic analysis, and we see how many hundreds of thousands of jobs here in America are supported by the ethanol industry, and it really all begins at the farm. It's the farmers that give us the feedstock. It's the farmers that invest in our plants. It's the farmers that want to see their own communities expanding and being successful. And that led to the creation of the ethanol industry so many years ago. I mean, RFA has been around for over 45 years now. So we have seen that history from day one, that connection to the farm.
And Cindy, you're exactly right. I mean, I sort of alluded to this previously. The ethanol supply chain is entirely contained in North America, in the United States, from the time the seed is planted in the ground until the time the ethanol is blended with gasoline and put into someone's gas tank. All of the inputs, all of the jobs, everything along that entire supply chain is American based. It's domestic based. The oil industry cannot say the same thing. Yes, they're producing more crude oil domestically, but guess what? We are still importing a lot of crude oil, a lot of crude oil. About 35% of the crude oil that goes into U.S. refineries is imported still today. And that's because, certain refineries are set up to process certain types of crude oil. And if that certain grade isn't available or isn't being produced in the U.S., well, guess what? It's being imported. You also mentioned, we talked about California. The overwhelming majority of gasoline that is consumed in California is made from imported crude oil because California is cut off from pipeline infrastructure, and they're sort of isolated. It's a fuel island, if you will, and so they are very reliant on imports yet today, even with the shale boom and everything we hear about domestic oil production. So our supply chain is very unique in that from step one of the process to the final product being put in the consumer's tank, it is all American based, all domestic grown, domestic produced, and that is a very key feature and important aspect of what we do in this industry.
And on that same vein, a study came out just a couple of weeks ago from USFRA that stressed the importance of biofuels expansion to the future of agriculture in this country. And I know RFA contributed to that study, and I wanted to get some of your comments on it.
Well, I think the message from that study was very sobering and should be a wake-up call for policymakers and anyone who's concerned about the future of agriculture in this country. Since day one of the United States of America, agriculture has been a tremendously important part of our economy. Our founding fathers, many of them themselves were farmers. You look at people like Thomas Jefferson. It's in our blood. Agriculture is woven into the fabric of our country. It is a strength that the United States has, a comparative advantage, an economic advantage over countries around the globe. We have a tremendous national asset here with our agriculture industry. And so that S&P Global study that was done for the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Coalition shows that, hey, guess what? Farmers are going to continue increasing their efficiency and increasing their productivity. The technology is continuing to evolve. Farmers are better at what they do today than they were yesterday, than they were 10 years ago, than they were 50 years ago. So that productivity is going to continue to increase. And so that means we're going to have larger supplies of farm commodities in the U.S. And so then the challenge becomes, how do we continue to build markets and grow demand for that product and that increased productivity? And that's where biofuels comes into play. That study actually says, look, if we just continue along the path we're on, if we just kind of kick our feet up and say, hey, we're happy with the status quo, we're going to lose 30 million corn acres in the next couple of decades. And that means we're going to lose family farms, and we're going to lose rural communities that depend on the economic activity of those farms. So, a very important study. And again, it just underscores the importance of continuing to grow our biofuels industry uh, when we think about the future of agriculture in the U.S.
All right, as we wrap it up, Geoff, any last thoughts here on our nation's 250th anniversary as Americans across the country celebrate?
Yeah, I think the take-home message here is, if you want to continue to see lower prices at the pump, if you want to continue to see uh, enhanced energy security, if you are concerned about our continued reliance on foreign sources of energy, you need to support renewable fuels like ethanol. And your elected officials need to be hearing from you about the importance of of having expanded access and expanded use of these products here in the United States. It is, as we're coming up on Independence Day, it is one of the smartest things we can do to increase our independence here in the United States.
And if you're on the road this holiday week or anytime, you can check for low prices nationwide on E15 and E85 on the RFA-sponsored crowdsourced website e85prices.com. And that's it for this edition of the Ethanol Report. Thanks for listening.